Hello there, a very warm welcome to you. I'm Alice Baxter with BBC World News. Now we're taking you straight to Cuba, where President Obama has arrived on what is being termed a historic visit, the first to the island by a sitting president for nearly 90 years. He'll be there for 2 and will meet President Raul Castro. Well, the pair will discuss trade and political reform. Well, Dr. Helen Yaffe is an economic history fellow at the London School of Economics and the author of Che Guevara, The Economics of Revolution. Good to have you with us. Now, you and I were watching that arrival of the first family of the United States arriving en masse on the tarmac in Havana just about a quarter of an hour ago now. The term historic is often overused by us journalists. We're horribly guilty of it, but in this instance, it's justified.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you think that these are two countries who brought the world to the brink of a nuclear war in 1962, obviously, and who would have thought this just a few years ago when the relationship between the countries seemed to be at crisis point. So, yeah, since the announcement in December 2014 that the countries had re-established diplomatic relations, and that was the result of 18 months of secret talks, which, you know, really took the world by surprise. And there's been a sort of positive spiral between the two countries, and you know, there are many issues still to be resolved, but the first steps are being taken.
Of course, these first important steps being taken. Dr. Helen Yaffe, please do stick around, because I think we've got a lot to talk about over the next half an hour or so. But right now, I just want to check in with Barbara Pled-Usher, our correspondent, who's on the streets of Havana for us. And Barbara, we were talking earlier about the slight makeover that the central streets of Old Havana have undertaken in the run-up to this visit by President Obama. The smell of paint still wafting about in the air.
Yes, the Cubans have done as much as they can to make the city look good for President Obama, not only in Old Havana, which is where he's going to be going on a walkabout shortly if the weather clears, but in other parts of the city, the streets that he will drive on, the street from the airport, the streets in the city on which he will drive, they've painted buildings, they've repaired the pavement. In a few cases, they've put up new billboards, and some private citizens have put out posters, a few posters of President Obama himself, including one of President Obama and President Raul Castro. Again, things that you would not have believed that you would have seen in just 18 months ago. So the city has been undergoing a makeover for President Obama, and the people themselves have been eagerly looking forward to his visit. I think many of them are fairly understand that him actually stepping onto Cuban soil isn't going to radically change their lives right away. The fact that rapprochement happened a year ago hasn't necessarily changed the lives of many Cubans, but they do appreciate the steps that he's taken to get this far, and the symbolic importance of Mr. Obama visiting Cuba is very great indeed.
Visiting it with his entire family, Malia, Sasha and Michelle, all here as well, Barbara. But we won't actually see the streets swamped, will we? Because not only is the weather unfortunately terrible, uncharacteristically terrible for this visit, but also Cubans, as I understand, have been encouraged to stay at home during this visit.
Yes, the weather's not so great at the moment, although I have to say that's not necessarily uncharacteristic. I know the images of endless sunshine here, but you do get, especially at this time of year, what they call cold fronts and rain sweeping in, which is bad timing, unfortunately. So probably less people on the street for that reason, but also, as you said, the Cuban government had been telling people that it would be better for them if they didn't come out on the street, because there'll be street closures for security reasons, and they probably wouldn't get a very close look at the president anyway. I do think, though, that they will be watching as much as they can on their televisions, not only when President Obama lands, but then anything else he does during this whole trip. And, you know, the Americans have made the emphasis of the trip on the Cuban people. Of course, President Obama will be meeting President Castro, and there will be a lot of pomp and ceremony and press conferences around that. But the Obama administration has always said its policy is aimed at engaging the Cuban people. and hoping that that will bring change about on the island rather than isolating the leadership. So we're looking at things like Mr. Obama will be meeting with a group of entrepreneurs. Stimulating the private sector here is a big part of the American approach. He's going to be going to a baseball game. Again, something that's common between Cuba and the United States. Both love baseball, and of course a lot of the good players in the American League are Cuban. And he's also going to be addressing the nation. He's going to be speaking at a famous theater downtown, but we understand that his remarks will be broadcast on state television, which would be unprecedented. I mean, obviously it is because he's never been here before, but it's just amazing that this is something that they plan to do, which means all Cubans will be able to hear his message. So, and then again, he will also be meeting with the dissidents that the Americans have been backing all along, saying that this is an issue of human rights to stand up against an authoritarian regime, something the Cuban government has said they don't want any interference on. But again, it's something that Mr. Obama is going to be raising with President Raul Castro. So that is the area of his visit. A lot of that is what I think the American government will be emphasizing.
Yeah, so pretty much everything on the table, isn't there, ahead of this historic two-day visit. Barbara, really good to check in with you. I think we're going to come back to you at the end of the show, but just for now, Barbara Plezasha there for us, trying to keep dry in central Havana. Dr. Helen Yaffe, who's still here with me in the studio from the London School of Economics. Barbara just touched on it there at the end, that President Obama will be meeting with political dissidents during this visit, including this group that was demonstrating just a few hours before his arrival, the Ladies in White. Could you just explain who they are and the significance of that?
Yeah, the Ladies in White got set up as the wives and sisters of a group of people who were arrested a few years ago and were accused by the Cuban government of receiving money from the US or through agencies funded by the US to break the laws in Cuba through various means of promoting regime change. And the interesting thing is that all those prisoners have subsequently been released in Cuba. They've had an amnesty. But the Ladies in White have continued protesting. They are free to do so. They have a protest every week. And obviously for them, the opportunity provided by Obama's visit to, draw a bit of the spotlight to themselves is something that wouldn't be missed. I mean, they are a controversial group. They don't have much following, hardly any among the Cuban people, not least because they receive payment for their activism. So the payment they receive for attending one march is almost the same as a average monthly salary of a Cuban.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Important to remember as well that although there's been so many steps taken in the lead up to this visit in terms of the thawing of relations, including economic relations between the two, this visit does not mark the complete normalization of a relationship between Cuba and the United States, because that 54-year-old economic embargo, that's still in place, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's codified in law through Congress, so it would require a vote by Congress. However, I mean, the Cubans have been very clear in laying out the aspects that could be removed very quickly by executive decree. And Obama took some measures, or rather his administration took some measures which were announced just a couple of days ago. Among those measures, I mean, it gives you an idea. I don't think people realise the extent of the blockade. So one of the measures that's just been removed was that US citizens visiting any country in Europe would have been breaking the law to drink any drink that had a Cuban product in. So if they'd gone to a bar, I mean, I'm thinking about my students at the London School of Economics. We have many students from the United States. If they went to the student bar and had a Cuba Libre with Havana Club, they would have been breaking, violating the US blockade. So, there are some quite absurd measures which are, thankfully being removed. But, it's interesting that all this sort of apparatus or infrastructure that's impeding the relationship is actually on the US side. So the onus is really on the United States administration. And Obama has shown, particularly with the announcement a couple of days ago, that he is serious. There are many more measures that he can take using his presidential privilege.
But what a wonderful first step to have been taken today, the first of many perhaps. Dr. Helen Yaffe from the London School of Economics, many thanks for talking us through this historic visit that of course we are following here on BBC News, this historic visit by not only President Barack Obama but also his wife Michelle, their daughters Sasha and Malia, all having touched down just in the last half hour or so on the runway in Havana in Cuba, the first visit by a sitting US president in 88 years. More of course on the BBC website, and we'll be returning to this, our top story here on BBC News throughout the hour. But